Have you ever witnessed someone overlooked save the day? Mr. Brooks, your blood pressure is dangerously high and you have worrying neurological symptoms. You need to go to the hospital now, said the cleaning lady with a firmness that made the billionaire CEO stop shouting on the phone. Richard Brooks, 53, owner of a pharmaceutical empire worth $2 billion, looked at the 42-year-old black woman as if she had just spoken Chinese. Kesha Washington stood there in her uniform, holding cleaning supplies, having the audacity to give him medical advice. Excuse me. Richard laughed derisively, lowering his cell phone. Are you giving me medical advice now? What is your background again? Advanced cleaning. The sarcasm cut through the air of the luxurious office on the 30th floor of the Brooks Pharmaceutical Tower. Kesha had just witnessed Richard staggering, his hands shaking, and his mind confused during a videoconference meeting. Symptoms she recognized immediately, but which all the executives present completely ignored. Sir, I'm not just, Kesha began, but was interrupted. You're nothing but a cleaning lady, Richard growled, his face red with irritation. Go back to your chemicals and let me run my company in peace. And next time, clean in silence. What will happen when her expertise is finally acknowledged? Stay tuned to Black Voices to find out. What Richard didn't know was that Kesha Washington had been a registered nurse for 15 years before losing everything in a fabricated scandal. A case of racial discrimination so brutal that it forced her to take cleaning jobs to survive. But her medical mind never stopped working. She had noticed the signs for weeks. The slowed coordination, the occasional slurred speech, the episodes of disorientation that Richard dismissed as business stress. All the symptoms pointed to a serious neurological condition that if left untreated could be fatal. I understand perfectly, Mr. Brooks, Kesha replied with unsettling calm. I'll keep doing my job. But while Richard returned to his million-dollar calls, Kesha did something he would never expect. She began discreetly documenting everything. Every symptom, every episode, every moment when his arrogance overcame his survival instinct. Richard Brooks thought he had complete control over his company and the people below him. What he didn't realize was that the woman who cleaned his office was keeping a secret that could save his life if he stopped being arrogant enough to listen. As Kesha quietly organized her cleaning supplies, her trained eyes continued to observe. She knew exactly what was happening with Richard Brooks. And more importantly, she knew exactly what to do about it. Could this underestimated woman turn the tables on a powerful CEO? Keep watching Black Voices to see the dramatic turn of events. 3 days later, Richard Brooks was worse, but his arrogance had tripled. During an executive board meeting, Kesha witnessed him confuse the names of his own directors and repeat the same question 3 times in 10 minutes. When she discreetly approached to clear the conference table, she overheard fragments of the conversation that alarmed her. Richard, are you okay? You seem confused today, James Morrison, the CFO, murmured with genuine concern. Confused? Richard exploded, slamming his fist on the table. I'm perfectly fine. Maybe you're not keeping up with my thinking. I've always been 3 steps ahead of everyone. Kesha saw the subtle tremor in his left hand. The way he blinked repeatedly as if trying to focus his vision, progressive neurological symptoms she had seen many times before when she worked in the neurology department at Metropolitan Hospital before she was destroyed professionally. The scandal had begun 5 years ago when Kesha, then head nurse on the night shift, publicly questioned Dr. Mitchell Barnes's excessive opioid prescriptions. She had documented that black patients were consistently given lower doses of painkillers than white patients with identical conditions while being more quickly labeled as drug seekers. Are you accusing a respected doctor of racism? Asked hospital director Dr. Patricia Wells during the disciplinary meeting. Based on what scientific evidence? Based on 15 years of experience and 200 pages of detailed documentation, Kesha replied, placing her meticulous research on the table. But the internal investigation was a sham. Dr. Barnes was a personal friend of the CEO and a generous donor to the hospital. Instead of reviewing her evidence, they created an alternative narrative. Kesha was emotionally unstable and projecting personal issues of race onto medical practice. The final blow came when they discovered that she had allegedly violated medication protocols, fabricated allegations they could never prove, but which were enough to destroy her career. Within 6 months, she lost her license, her reputation, and any hope of ever working in the medical field again. "People like you always think the world owes you something," Dr. Barnes had said on her last day with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Maybe it's time to accept that some places just aren't for you." Now 5 years later, cleaning out the office of the most powerful man in the pharmaceutical industry, Kesha felt a bitter irony. Richard Brooks owned the company that manufactured the very opiates Dr. Barnes had selectively prescribed. "Are you still here?" Richard's sharp voice brought her back to the present. The meeting was over, and he was watching her with irritation. "How long does it take to clean a desk?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks. I was just being thorough." "Thorough?" He laughed dismissively. "You're a janitor, not a surgeon. Speed matters more than perfection in your line of work." Kesha nodded silently, but her trained eyes continued to register details. Richard's right pupil was slightly more dilated than his left. His verbal responses had a subtle delay. His fine motor coordination was clearly impaired. Classic signs of increased intracranial pressure. "And another thing," Richard continued, adjusting his tie with less precise movements than usual. "Next time you have the brilliant idea of giving me medical advice, remember that I pay some of the best doctors in the country. I don't need the opinion of someone who cleans toilets for a living." The casual cruelty of his words cut deep. But Kesha kept her expression neutral. She had learned to absorb humiliation without reacting, a skill developed over years of systematic discrimination. "I understand perfectly, sir," she replied, beginning to put away her cleaning supplies. But as she left the office, Kesha made a decision. That night, she contacted her former colleague, Dr. Margaret Henderson, who still worked at Metropolitan Hospital. She sent Margaret a detailed report of Richard's symptoms, including her observations and the documentation she had collected over the past month. Margaret was shocked. "Kesha, these symptoms suggest a possible brain aneurysm or severe hypertension crisis. We need to act fast. Can you get him to a hospital?" Kesha hesitated. "He won't listen to me. He's too arrogant." "Then we need to force the issue," Margaret replied. "I'll call the hospital board and report this as an anonymous tip." Within hours, an ambulance was dispatched to Brooks' pharmaceutical tower under the pretense of a routine health inspection. When paramedics arrived, Richard resisted furiously. "This is absurd. I don't need medical attention." But his protests weakened as his legs gave out beneath him, and his speech became slurred. The paramedics acted quickly, stabilizing him and rushing him to the emergency room. Tests confirmed Kesha's diagnosis, a rapidly expanding brain aneurysm that had been dangerously close to rupturing. Surgery was performed immediately, and Richard survived, but the recovery would be long and humbling. When he woke up in the hospital 2 days later, the first person he saw was Kesha, standing quietly by the door in her cleaning uniform, but carrying a dignity that made his previous arrogance seem pathetic and small. "You saved my life," he whispered. "I've been trying to save it for weeks. You chose to humiliate me instead." "I know." His voice broke. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but you're right. You don't." Kesha pulled up a chair and sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "But I didn't save your life for you. I saved it because I swore an oath to protect lives. And some oaths are bigger than the treatment we receive from the people we save." Richard's humiliation was just beginning. In the days that followed, the story leaked out in full. The billionaire CEO who nearly died because he was too arrogant to listen to a nurse cleaner who had correctly identified his symptoms weeks earlier. Sandra Phillips and James Morrison tried to cover up the scandal, but Margaret had kept copies of all the communications where they ignored and ridiculed Kesha's medical concerns. Recordings of meetings where they suggested firing her for inappropriate behavior went viral on social media. The media turned the case into a national symbol of discrimination in the corporate environment. "Black cleaner saves CEO who looked down on her" became the headline for weeks. The Brooks Pharmaceutical Board of Directors called an emergency meeting. The company lost $300 million in market value in 3 days, and Richard was forced to step down temporarily as CEO for medical recovery and reflection on human resources policies. But the greatest humiliation came when Richard learned that Kesha had refused all offers of severance pay and paid interviews. "I don't need anyone's blood money," she told reporters. "I need this to serve as an example. Competence and dignity don't depend on diplomas or skin color." While Richard recovered from surgery, facing weeks of physical therapy to regain his motor coordination, Kesha quietly returned to her cleaning job. But now, every employee at Brooks Pharmaceutical treated her with the respect she had always deserved. The man who had spent his entire life belittling inferior people had learned in the most humiliating way possible that his life depended on the very people he considered invisible. And the whole world was watching his lesson in humility being served on the national news. But did Richard truly learn his lesson? And what would be the fate of a woman who proved herself greater than all the prejudice directed at her? Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying someone. It's forcing them to live knowing they owe their existence to those they always considered inferior. 6 months later, Kesha Washington received the National Heroine Award from the Surgeon General of the United States in a ceremony broadcast live across the country. The same cleaning uniform that had been the subject of ridicule was now framed in the National Museum of African American History with a plaque that read, "The uniform of a woman who proved that competence has no color." Richard Brooks watched from the front row in a wheelchair he still needed occasionally due to the residual effects of surgery. His hands trembled slightly, no longer from the disease, but from the emotion of seeing the woman he had humiliated being celebrated as she should have been from the beginning. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kesha said into the microphone, her voice echoing through the packed auditorium. "For 15 years, I was a nurse. For 5 years, I was treated as if I were invisible. But today, I understand that I never stopped being what I always was, someone who saves lives, regardless of who recognizes it or not." Brooks Pharmaceutical had been forced to implement drastic changes after the scandal. Sandra Phillips and James Morrison were fired for discriminatory conduct, and the company created a diversity program that became a national model. Ironically, the company's stock recovered completely after it demonstrated a real commitment to inclusion. Dr. Patricia Williams, now medical director of the new Kesha Washington Institute for Preventive Medicine, smiled from the audience. The institute, funded entirely by a $10 million anonymous donation from Richard Brooks, offered free medical training to people from underserved communities. "When that man told me to stay in my place," Kesha continued, "he didn't know that my place has always been saving lives. He just couldn't see past his own prejudices." Richard had tried to reach out to her several times during his recovery, but Kesha kept her distance out of respect. Not out of anger, but because she understood that some lessons must be lived alone to be truly learned. The public humiliation Richard faced was devastating, but transformative. He lost friends, social influence, and was forced to confront decades of casual arrogance. But he also gained something he never had: genuine humility and respect for people he had always considered inferior. Revenge, Kesha concluded her speech, is not about making someone pay for what they did to us. True revenge is becoming so great that their smallness can no longer reach us. The ovation lasted 8 minutes. Richard was one of the first people to stand, applauding with tears streaming down his face. Later in the hallway, he finally got a chance to talk briefly with Kesha. "I was an idiot," he said simply. "You were," she agreed without hesitation. "But idiots can learn if they're humble enough. Thank you for saving me, even though I didn't deserve it." "I didn't save you because you deserved it," Kesha replied, adjusting the medal on her chest. "I saved you because some things are bigger than the treatment we receive, and because the best way to overcome prejudice is to prove that our humanity is greater than the cruelty of others." Richard nodded, knowing he would spend the rest of his life trying to earn the forgiveness he had already received. Today, Kesha runs 3 community hospitals and trains doctors in advanced clinical observation. Richard has stepped away from business to devote himself entirely to philanthropy, especially medical education programs for minorities. 2 lives were saved that day, one from a brain aneurysm, the other from terminal ignorance. The greatest revenge against those who devalue us is not to destroy them. It is to become so extraordinary that they spend the rest of their lives trying to understand how they could have been so blind. Kesha proved that competence, dignity, and greatness do not depend on the approval of others, but only on an unwavering commitment to being who we truly are. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Black Voices for more stories that prove that our true strength appears exactly when others try to diminish us.